As you heard, Nixonian was a common phrase used to describe President Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey this week. It reminded some of then-President Nixon's so-called Saturday Night Massacre. That was October of 1973 when he ordered the dismissal of Special Watergate prosecutor Archibald Cox, which led to the resignations of the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General. And now a tweet from President Donald Trump has some wondering if he may have taped his conversations, another famous Nixon move. Sean Spicer dodged the subject yesterday, and then President Trump had very little to say about it when Fox's Judge Jeanine Pirro asked him.
Did President Trump record his conversations with former FBI Director Comey?
I assume you're referring to the tweet, and I've talked to the President. The President has nothing further to add on that.
What about the idea that in a tweet you said that there might be tape recordings?
Well, that I can't talk about. I won't talk about that. All I want is for Comey to be honest, and I hope he will be, and I'm sure he will be, I hope.
I've got somebody who knows a thing or two about White House tapes, the man who told Nixon to burn his. Patrick Buchanan, the former senior advisor to President Nixon and presidential candidate himself. He's a syndicated columnist and has a brand new book out. It's called Nixon's White House Wars, The Battles That Made and Broke a President and Divided America Forever. Patrick, I want to put back on the screen that tweet from President Trump because I had a different interpretation than most. James Comey better hope there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. Was that a threat or was that an admission? Because it came after revelations from the Comey side, and it made me wonder, was that the president saying, hey, Comey, you better not have been taping, or as most are interpreting this, was it Donald Trump saying, be careful, I might have you on tape?
The second, I believe, Michael, I cannot believe the FBI director would walk into the Oval Office and tape the President of the United States, whereas Jack Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, as well as Richard Nixon, had taping devices. But my guess is that no taping device exists or did not exist at the time of that meeting, and that there's sort of a warning, tell the truth, Mr. Comey.
Well, you say you can't imagine that the FBI director would walk into the Oval Office and tape the president. I can't imagine that the president would allow the FBI director to come in and tape him. What is the upside for President Trump in not saying in that Fox interview or having Sean Spicer make very clear, of course, he's not taping anybody?
Well, because, quite frankly, that the President of the United States needs a taping device in the Oval Office. If you got, for example, Mr. Lavrov was in there with Kislyak, the Russians, and what did they say about Syria and Iran? And what did they say about Afghanistan? I mean, you want evidence of what they said, and they would expect that you would be taping them, just as I'm sure Mr. Kislyak was sure that he was being taped by the NSA during the when he had those various meetings. I mean, this is not unusual, Michael.
Yeah, I would see a point of differentiation between tapping Kislyak when he's on a phone outside of the White House versus recording him when he's in that inner sanctum. Let me get to this bigger issue. Sure. You don't see the parallels. Am I right that you don't see the bigger parallels between this and Watergate? And if so, why not?
I do see a parallel between the fact that he fired someone who headed an investigation. But look, during the Watergate, when I was in the Oval Office with the president, when he had to fire Elliot Richardson, we were in the middle of the Yom Kippur War. The vice president had just resigned. He'd just been replaced. You had the Yom Kippur War. You had Kissinger in Moscow. The president told me, I cannot have my attorney general defying me when I'm telling Brezhnev what I'm going to do in the Middle East if he doesn't do certain things. Let me tell you, I'll reveal something to you, Michael. There's no doubt about it. Nixon was thinking about firing Cox for a long, long time, and this was the triggering event. He told me in that Oval Office, and I quote, we can't have that viper sleeping in the bed with us. Cox was moving far beyond his original mandate. He was investigating B.B. Rebozo, Nixon's good friend. I mean, the Watergate prosecution was all over the lot. I can understand why Nixon did it, and it was costly and expensive.
I read that part of your book, put it up on the screen. I didn't know you'd bring it up. I intended to, where you say that Nixon was intending to send a message to Brezhnev. Could Trump be trying to prove his strength to Russia or China in the way he's handling this?
No, Nixon was forced by what Richardson had told us. I was in the White House. He had told Haig and others he was on board that Cox had to accept the compromise on the tapes and that he would make sure it happened. Then comes Thursday or Friday, and Elliott switches. He gets cold feet, and he comes down on the side of Archibald Cox. And the president is there now with Cox having a press conference saying, I'm going to go after even more tapes, and he had to act. So this was forced on President Nixon by the situation he was in. With regard to Comey, whether Mr. Trump did it in January 21st or did it a week from now really made no difference because it's not that big a deal, excuse me. Here's where I disagree with the folks, Michael, is that was a huge deal at a time of, I mean, the Arabs had just imposed an oil embargo on the United States. It was a very dramatic October.
Right, but the Watergate burglary was Liddy and company trying to go into Larry O'Brien's office at the DNC, which happened to be located at the Watergate Hotel. This is an enemy state meddling in a U.S. election. To me, it's apples and oranges because this is the far more serious of the two.
Well, look, Michael, you're a little bit off on your timing. The break-in was in June of '72. The firing of Cox was in October of '73. We had
No, but I'm talking about Watergate. I'm talking about Watergate versus the Russian probe.
The initial event in Watergate was a third-rate burglary, if you will. But right now, look, the Russians clearly have hacked, according to all our intelligence agencies. But Donald Trump, the president, has a very valid point. There's a cloud been sitting over his head that he conspired with Putin or Russian agents to hack the DNC and to hack a Podesta and then work with WikiLeaks and all of this to win the election, and that he succeeded in this series of felonies, alleged series of felonies. That, as far as I know, there is no justification for that cloud. We've had Mr. Clapper himself say, we found no collusion. Mike Morrell, former head of the CIA, we found no collusion. I can understand the president's rage that Comey or someone won't stand up and say, look, we're not going to tell you where we're investigating, but we can tell you this. We have found no collusion between the President of the United States or his closest aides and the Russians in hacking and disseminating that material. Why can't they tell us that?
Well, if the investigations were concluded and had come to that point,
Michael,
then I'd want, but they haven't been. They've been stymied.
Michael, this is the problem. Why cannot the FBI in 10 months cannot make a decision as to whether or not somebody in Trump's operation either phoned or emailed or went to Moscow and said, you're doing a great job, and here's where you ought to put these out. This is excuse me, Comey's, why are we 10 months in? 10 months into Watergate, people were in prison. What is going on that they cannot find any evidence that Mr. Trump colluded with anybody to do that?
Patrick, you famously told Nixon to burn the tapes. He didn't take your advice, or maybe history would have taken us in a different direction. To the extent this president has recordings of Comey, would you tell him to burn them?
No, if he's made them. No, I wouldn't tell him to burn them. There was nothing illegal about what Nixon did. It was very foolish that it was a taping machine that started running as soon as he started talking, as I said. Look, Jack Kennedy and others, during the missile crisis, you're talking with Dobrynin, and Dobrynin sending you signals from Khrushchev about whether he's going to remove the missiles. Don't you want a tape recording, and don't you want a record of that you can look over and say, what exactly did they commit to and what didn't they commit to?
Yeah, but not between the FBI director and the president. Patrick, thank you as always. Appreciate you being here.
Delighted.
Let's see what